Today we will be covering a detailed summary of Paradise Lost, the most famous epic poem by John Milton. We will not be doing a line-by-line analysis of the poem because it's very long. However, I will describe it in such a way that you will understand it comprehensively. Before we begin, let us learn some basic facts about this work. This poem was written in blank verse by Milton, and the first version was published in 1667, and it consisted of 10 books, while the second edition was published in 1674. It was arranged into 12 books. Now let's begin with Book 1, where Milton begins by asking a deity, a god, a spirit, or particularly a muse for help. He was calling out to the muse because he believed that the muse would help him write better poetry. Many poets have been following this practice of talking to the muse. Now you all must be very curious, what does he want from the muse? Milton wants the to muse tell about man's first disobedience. Now you must be wondering why he wants to shame us humans by telling us about our acts of disobedience. But Milton explains that his goal through this work is to justify the many ways of God to men. He wants to talk about man's disobedience towards God and the result of that disobedience. What kind of disobedience and how? This you will understand as we move further now. The first book opens at the time when God threw out rebel angels from heaven into hell. The opening scene is of hell and describes Satan and his trustworthy friends who have just been thrown out. Why were they thrown out? We will get to know the backstory in book number 5. Moving ahead, the poem then focuses on Satan as he lies dazed in a lake of fire that is totally dark. Next to him is Beelzebub, Satan's second-in-command, where they discussed if they should take revenge on God. While Beelzebub says that they cannot defeat God, Satan says that he's confident that he can defeat God. So Satan further utters the most famous lines, "The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven." Now, after saying this, Satan tries to make the best of his situation in hell. According to him, it is better to rule hell than to serve in heaven. Now, when he has fully made up his mind, he asks an army of fallen angels to get up. They all start to take the ground and find gold and many other minerals. They further build a temple, which is known as Pandemonium, which will now be Satan's throne and meeting place. If Lucifer on Netflix is on your watch list, then this throne should look quite familiar to you. This throne building is an example of the many ways Satan and his followers try to copy the glory of heaven in hell. One interesting fact to keep in mind about Paradise Lost Book 1 is that the initial 16 lines consist of only one sentence. Can you imagine that? Nevertheless, another important line in the book says that "Glory never shall his wrath or might extort from me." Here, glory refers to the courage that we should never submit or yield. As we enter Book 2, the demonic council in hell debates how best to retaliate against God by war or through tricks. Now we have Belial, an evil spirit, who says that if the fallen angels don't trouble and anger God, he will free them of their punishment. Hence, according to Belial, there should not be any kind of war, whether open or hidden or concealed. However, once Belial finishes his talk, Moloch says that it doesn't make any sense to worship someone you hate. Hence, he suggests that they stay in hell, embracing freedom and rejecting servitude, even if it's harsh. So it's better that we stay here, but at this point, Beelzebub interrupts and says that Moloch is wrong. He says that God will still rule them in hell. In both the cases, God is going to rule us. Now the fallen angels wonder what they can probably do to anger God. Beelzebub suggests that attacking the common mortal man who he thinks is less in power but more favoured by God. After much debate, the fallen angels from hell decide to damage the new world that God has created, which is called Earth, and seduce the mortal man God has just created. But the only problem was to decide whom they should send. They all unanimously chose their leader as Satan. Thus, Satan starts his journey to Earth, and before leaving he meets his children, sin and death, at the gate of hell. But as you know, God is watching everything. He sees Satan reaching Earth and predicts the fall of man. However, he also sees that his son Jesus will sacrifice himself to save man. In Book 3, Milton seeks help from the heavenly muses once more, as he's now grappling with the illness of blindness. But you all must be curious, what does this man seek now? He again invokes the muse, but this time addresses it to the holy light. He asked the heavenly light to shine inside him and give him divine knowledge so that he can further share this knowledge with his readers. Moving ahead, Book 3 opens in heaven and we see God pondering over the situation. We learn how Satan is trying to destroy man and how God has predicted that man will fall easily. But why does man fall? God explains that he has made man in such a way that he is sufficient to have stood but free to fall, which means that man himself chooses to do the right thing or the wrong thing. So now God's Son was really worried about the predictions made by God about man's fall. But God assures him that he will renew man's powers, but generations of men will die until someone goes down on earth to help them and redeem them. It's finally the Son of God who comes forward and chooses to save the man from the fall. This eventually will happen in the future, but right now let us get back to Satan. In Book 2 we saw that Satan left hell, and now in Book 3 Satan lands on earth, but he gets distracted when he sees the gate of heaven from a distance. He climbs up a few steps, but he's again distracted by the sun and flies over it. However, at the sun he sees an angel standing named Uriel. But he also knows that if he goes up just like this, his plans will be known to everyone, and they'll be destroyed. So he changes form and becomes an innocent-looking cherub, which you can think of as a little angel often depicted in art as a small, chubby, winged child. So he then asks for the directions to paradise. While Uriel is tricked by Satan's new form, he shows Satan the way to paradise. Moving over to the next book, book number 4. In book number 4, Satan enters paradise. There he finds Adam and Eve, God's first humans. Then Satan becomes jealous of their happiness. He hears Adam telling Eve that they should not eat the fruit from the forbidden tree of knowledge. Meanwhile, Uriel, the angel we just talked about, warns Gabriel and the other angels that one of the fallen angels has entered paradise. They all get into detective mode, and soon Satan's caught in the shape of a little frog or toad trying to whisper to Eve in her sleep. But after this discovery, he is thrown out of Eden, the paradise garden. Then we have the book number 5, where Adam and Eve wake up from their sleep, and Eve tells Adam about the disturbing dream she had. She tells that in a dream she saw an angel who offered her fruit from the tree of knowledge and also promised her that she could become a goddess if she ate from it. But Adam tells Eve not to overthink, as it was just a dream. They both go off to work in the field, starting their day with prayers. Now God, who was seeing everything, sends Raphael, another angel, to warn Adam and Eve about Satan and also remind them that they can choose whatever they want to, but it will eventually determine their fate. Finally, Adam and Raphael meet, and Adam keeps on asking the angel Raphael about heaven, but he says that he does not know of anything except earth, but Adam keeps on requesting. So eventually Raphael tells Adam and Eve in detail the story of the great war between God and bad angels. And he also tells that Satan, also whose name is Lucifer, was the most beautiful angel of heaven, but he became jealous of the Son of God and led a war against God. However, within the fallen angels, there was an angel known as Abdiel, who stopped his allegiance to Satan and told the fallen angels that they would be defeated one day. Hence he protested and left the followers of Satan. He was welcomed back into the ranks of God and was forgiven by God for his loyalty, obedience, and resistance to evil. Moving on to the 6th book, this is merely an extension of the angelic or great war Raphael mentioned in the previous book. So we get to learn here that in the angelic war, Satan's followers fought the battle with the faithful angels for 3 whole days. But as the war entered the 3rd day, God sent the Messiah. Remember God's Son who came forward to volunteer and save man from the fall? Yes, that's him, God's Son Jesus. Jesus rides in his flaming chariot as the Messiah and drives out all the rebels from heaven and sends them down to hell. Moving to book number 7, here Adam, out of curiosity, asks Raphael how heaven and earth first started and also asks as to why Eden was created. Now here it gets very interesting when Raphael tells the story of creation. According to the tale, on the 1st and 2nd days, God created heaven, earth, light, day and night. On the 3rd day, dry land was created on earth and mountains emerged. Further seas were created and grass and fruit-yielding trees appeared. The fourth day features the creation of the sun, moon and stars. On the fifth day, reptiles were generated in the waters. On sixth day, the creation of cattle, bees, creeping things, and most interestingly, the serpent that was not harmful but obedient. On seventh day, within God took rest, and that's why we have 7 days in a week. So after all, this man was formed to govern over all, and in the end woman was formed from man, but just when you think Adam's questions would end, he keeps going on, which we shall see in the next book. Moving on to book 8, where Adam asks Raphael some rather difficult questions, such as about the movements of planets in the universe. Although Raphael does answer Aaron's questions, he insists that Adam should rather focus on earthly knowledge over heavenly knowledge, and finally, after so many questions, Adam is finally satisfied, and he takes us back into his own history. Now, when Adam first came down, he woke up in sweat and looked here and there and asked how he came there. As an answer, he had a dream where someone commanded him that he will be the first father of a man, but as we all saw how curious Adam was, he again asks whether he will have to live alone, and to that God replied that there are a lot of beasts down there and he wouldn't feel alone. But to this Adam argues that all other beasts are less powerful and are rather inferior, and what he wants is someone equal. So finally, God accepts his request, and Adam narrates how God made him fall asleep and used one of his ribs to make a woman which we all know as Eve. However, do remember Adam in this book, number 8, also tells Raphael that Eve is also one of his chief flaws and weaknesses. Now, after hearing the entire story, Raphael finally leaves Adam, but while going away, he reminds Adam that he has free will to avoid any temptation. Adam then thanks Raphael for the visit in return. Moving ahead to book 9, and I hope you remember how Satan was thrown out of Eden, but after being gone for many days, Satan decides to make a return. For this he changes his form into a serpent. Next morning, when Adam and Eve wake up for their gardening work, they have a small argument when Eve suggests that they both should go in separate directions to work. After much argument, Adam finally agrees. It is then when Satan as a serpent finds Eve alone and approaches her. So now Eve gets very surprised to see that the snake can speak, and she is soon induced by him to eat the fruit from the forbidden tree. When Adam gets to know about what Eve has done, he gets horrified about the consequences, but at the end he decides that he will be her partner and share her fate. Hence Adam also eats the fruit. So referring to this event, Milton writes that Adam was overcome with female charm, and so he ate the forbidden fruit against his better knowledge. So after eating the fruit, both Adam and Eve are aroused with lust and lie together and then fall to rest. Soon after they wake up with shame, finding themselves naked, they cover themselves with leaves, and in such emotional chaos they both start blaming each other for all that has happened. Now the above incident has been referred to by Milton in the book 9 as Fall of Man in 2 stages. Now let's talk about the next book, that is book number 10. And you all must be well aware time and again the above books have hinted the choices made will have consequences. Hence, after the above instant by Adam and Eve, Christ, who is the Son of God, comes into picture. He sentences the snake or serpent with a curse, that it will forever remain a hated enemy of mankind. Secondly, Lord Christ also announces the punishment for Eve. According to the punishment, Eve's pain will increase as she would have to bear children and will forever remain the servant of Adam. And Adam? He was also punished, and according to the punishment, Lord Christ said Adam would eat bread only by toiling and sweating. This was his curse, but more importantly, Adam lost God's grace forever. Now, as Christ announced the punishment, death and sin, they left the gates of hell and joined their father Satan on earth. Hence, Satan sent sin and death as his ambassadors on earth, while he himself went back to hell to see if his followers had all become snakes. While all this happened, God also made many changes on earth. He replaced the season of eternal spring with changing seasons and created violent storms, winds, hail, ice, floods and earthquakes. And finally, the punishment, which you all must be expecting by now. God sentenced Adam and Eve expulsion from Eden. Moving on to book 11, where God sends Michael and his group to make the sinning pair of Adam and Eve leave paradise. But before this happens, God commanded Michael to tell Adam everything about what will happen in the future due to his sin. So now, friends, as the angel Michael comes down to Eden and tells the news of expulsion to Adam and Eve, listening to their punishment, Eve breaks down in tears. However, Michael and Adam go to a hill where Michael tells him everything that shall happen in the future till the great flood. Michael even shows him a scene where there were two men offering sacrifices, however one man kills the other by hitting a stone. So Adam gets very confused by seeing the scene, but Michael explains that these men are Cain and Abel, who will be your and Eve's first sons. Adam gets horrified, but Michael explains that man will die from violence and diseases in the future, listening to what is waiting in the future. Adam also starts crying, but Michael explains that all this can be avoided by controlling what one eats and drinks. Moving on to Book 12. So this book focused on Lord Jesus. Continuing with his explanation in the previous book, Michael explains that in later future Israelites, that is, the people of Israel, will become more and more sinful until Jesus appears. However, Michael says that Jesus will be crucified, but he will be resurrected within 3 days' resurrection. So after the resurrection of Jesus, he will leave for heaven, but he will have a second coming to earth. So when he comes back, he will reward the good and punish the bad on Judgment Day. So after hearing everything, Adam is satisfied with the knowledge. Michael asks him to keep faith, and he will have an inner paradise, happier than paradise. Both Michael and Adam walk down the hill, and soon after a flaming sword is placed to block the gates of Eden as Adam and Eve are sent away from paradise. So as Adam and Eve leave paradise hand in hand with wandering steps and slow, they are comforted by their foreknowledge of the coming of Christ as Redeemer of mankind, meaning that Christ will be the Messiah of humanity, and that's how Paradise Lost ends. Let's now discuss another important part of our discussion, which is its critical analysis. John Dryden adapted Paradise Lost for a stage work named The State of Innocence, published in 1671. For this he sought and received Milton's permission to put Paradise Lost into a rhyme. By the early 18th century, Paradise Lost gained much attention. Joseph Addison published a series of essays in The Spectator, which was published in 1712. So in this work he ranked Milton's epic with the works of classical antiquity. Next we have Alexander Pope, who borrowed heavily from the imagery of Milton's poem, and his own work, The Rape of the Lock, constructed a mock epic that essentially became a parody of Paradise Lost. However, Milton's reputation also suffered because of Samuel Johnson, who was critical of Milton. Though Johnson praised the greatness of Paradise Lost, he did not like the use of images from nature by Milton. Then we have William Blake, who famously wrote, "The reason Milton wrote in fetters when he wrote of angels and God, and at liberty even of devils and hell, is because he was a true poet and of the devil's party without knowing it." Now what does this mean? According to Blake, Milton's depiction of God was so inferior to that of Satan that he considered Milton to be Satanist himself, which is definitely one harsh criticism. Then we have Shelley's Prometheus. In Prometheus Unbound, it's modelled after Milton's Satan. Shelley also wrote that Milton alleged no superiority of moral value to his God over his devil. However, despite the criticism, it must be noted that in Paradise Lost, Milton was not only justifying God's ways to humans in general, but he was justifying his ways to the English people between 1640 and 1660. With his work, he wanted to tell that the people of England had failed to establish a good society by deposing the king, and also questioned why they had welcomed back the monarchy. So according to him, just like Adam and Eve, people had failed due to their own weaknesses, their own lack of faith, their own passions and greed, their own sin. Hence God was not to be blamed for the trials and corruptions that happened in England during the times of Oliver Cromwell. And another interesting work that was inspired from Paradise Lost was Milton's God, written by William Empson in 1961. Empson concluded, after an idiosyncratic and spirited demolition of God's motives and actions, that the reason why the poem is so good is that it makes God so bad. Stanley Fish published Surprised by Sin, subtitle The Reader in Paradise Lost, in which he tried to bridge the opposing views by arguing that the true hero of the poem is in fact the reader. Now, since we have talked about Paradise Lost, let's talk about Paradise Lost sequel, written by Milton. It is called Paradise Regained. So one of Milton's friends, Thomas Elwood, read Paradise Lost, and he told Milton, "Hey friend, you have talked about Paradise Lost, but what about paradise being regained?" Hence, as a response, Milton wrote Paradise Regained, which was a series of debates between Christ and Satan. So this work was made up of 4 books and was published along with another work of Milton titled Samson Agonistus. So that's it from my side. See you all soon in the next video.